So, Sven, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm sure everybody's very keen to hear your insights on the questions that we're discussing. And the first question I've got for you today is, how do you decide when your team needs a leader?
Hey, Danny. Well, first of all, thanks very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I've been a leader from very early on in my career, even though I don't think that there is anybody who's a natural born leader. So for me, at least, there were some hard learning lessons there, and we'll get to them. So this is a great question. How do you decide when your team needs a leader? Because it presupposes that the team doesn't always need one, and I don't think that's on many people's minds. And but I believe it's very true. So if the team, for instance, has a clear purpose and it is motivated to pursue it, and the team members are well attuned to each other and they trust each other, then it's really a good time to just hang back and enjoy the show. There's always plenty of other stuff to do. We all painfully know that. So personally, I'll be happy for the additional time to get that stack smaller. And I really, from experience, found it counterproductive to hover over the team like an overprotective parent. However, you can typically smell trouble. For instance, in team meetings, uh, when they appear to not be effective, and some people seem to be mentally absent, or they simply don't say anything, or uh, perhaps one guy, and it's really mostly the guy, hogs the meeting. Perhaps there's a lot of emotion in the room. And we humans, we are social animals. So we have very fine antennae for these things. So a user leader will pick up such disturbances. And then it's just a matter of trust in oneself to take these signals seriously and act on them. However, it's not always action that is called for. Definitely not the big pep talk or anything like that. It just may be that the team is in that lull phase before the breakthrough, and it's sometimes hard to tell. So that comes with experience. And so, of course, the context is very important. I mean, in general, and you will certainly know this, teams go through these phases called forming, storming, norming, performing, and I think it was sometime in the 2000s that the last phase, the fifth phase, adjourning was added. And I have really seen this that teams do go through these phases, and they all bring out different traits in people, some sort of a genotype, phenotype thing. I mean, you are who you are, but then given the context and the situation, other traits of you will become visible. And like you have an introvert who hangs back during the forming and storming periods because it's too hot, and typically they don't get a lot of attention from the more extroverted personalities because they're busy with trying to mark the turf right away. But then in the later phases, those people will become the pillars of the team. And so your task as a leader is to get away from a one size fits all approach. And maybe you do that because of one's own or for your own narcissistic traits. And by the way, if you think that you are above such traits, that's a clear mandate for you to have a second look at yourself here, or out of lack of broader experience and adapt your leadership style to the phase the team is in and the individual members. Like one person might respond better to an authoritative approach, typically and perhaps curiously, the more assertive types. So if you see somebody being quite extroverted, then they often benefit. And it's not because you need to rein them in, but because they typically need a game. They need something, they need a good goal that they can work towards and prove themselves and the team that they're worth their salt.
Perfect. Yeah, I think you made a really great point there about trust, and I think it goes both ways, doesn't it? In situations like this, where you've got a high performing team that they don't necessarily look like they need much leadership, so you sort of have to trust that they can navigate the way through a project themselves. But I suppose the trust in the other direction is that they trust that if something does come up, that you as the leader, you are there ready to sort of pounce on those issues and help support them through back to where they need to be.
Exactly. And then it really depends on the phase. Like there are different leadership styles, and everybody who's like in leadership position and has ever picked up a book on leadership will know these different styles. And it's really depending on what phase you're in and what people you have around you, you can pick and choose what style you need. So,
Brilliant.
and I'm certainly not the bully kind of guy, but sometimes that's needed. And for me, that's a hard one.
Yeah, yeah, as I'm sure it is for most, to be fair. Brilliant. And I suppose, that leads us quite well into question two, which is how do you deal with conflicts within your teams? And, how successful has your personal approach to that been?
Great question. Yeah. Well, like I said, there is never one right approach, and it has to be based on the context. And that said, leadership is not only an art that you simply base on talent and instinct. That's what I thought when I assumed my first leadership position. I'm like, hey, I can do this, but it is really a craft, and certain things will work, and others will just not work. And personally, I had the pleasure to later in my career lead very highly intrinsically motivated individuals at the highest hard skill levels. Think in a room full of PhDs and MDs, and not necessarily that does not necessarily come with soft skills, because they actually tend to be very sensitive people, and they have very strong ideas. I'm not saying opinionated, but very strong ideas about how the company that everybody's in should be run. And they can get cynical when upper management decisions, or in many cases, shall we call them indecisions, don't conform to their view. And in many times they're right. And then, of course, the additional challenge is that I have to agree with them that they're right. It's just not within our radius of action. So they tend to believe that they're all great team players. And to them, it's about the subject matter because that's where they feel comfortable. And it's about getting things done and not about petty team squabbles. So if anything like that comes up, they're mostly mystified and unprepared to deal with that. And they just sort of want to get on and leave that to the side. But that's so important to focus on that. So that is certainly something that as a leader you have to deal with it. So uh, once the team members feel like they are in a team, right, um, you can help them becoming unconstructive in the criticism about external factors such as upper management. And I don't mean you need to hunker down or they need to hunker down and be not aware about their surroundings, but develop a good sense of what you can do and what is simply more or less a given. And then during the storming phase, for instance, people will have developed their ideas about what the goals are and how to reach them. And since they are the experts and not you as a leader, it is important to let them hash it out. And they need to come up with the best approach. And so that phase needs more of a coaching leadership style with role modeling, active listening. And that's something that, is when you do it, people look to you as a leader. So if you do that right, then they will naturally also assume this approach. Constructive feedback, a good dose of empathy. Feedback is not easy. Sometimes people are very sensitive, even for the most meaning feedback and the most constructive critique. It's hard. And many people are, for instance, miffed when when it comes out, when the team tells them, maybe that is not the right approach. However, not always. Some people actually are really happy when their ideas don't make it. After all, it's a lot less risky and it's less work. So, as a leader, when you have these folks, put individual coaching and development sessions on your calendar for them.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, no, I think you're right there. It's a lot of the time you've got to remind yourself that you're dealing with very different people in most instances, aren't you? Teams often perform better when there's different personalities, involved. But I think it's also, as a leader, being able to adapt your approach to each individual whilst maintaining the same standards for everybody. I think that's where the skill really comes into it, by the sounds of it.
Exactly. There's a at my in-laws, there is a great picture on the wall. Their kids are the same age as my kids, and they had on the fridge. They had this great picture where you see, and it's a critique of the German school system. You see a tree and different animals lined up in the tree. There's an elephant, and there's a squirrel, and whatnot. And the teacher goes, "Now, to make it fair, we make it we give everybody the same task: climb this tree." And of course, that's total nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So the cartoon makes it very obvious, but it's really something that you have to work as a leader. It's like, yeah, there is no one size fits all.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not. The final question I've got for you then is, what's the most valuable lesson that you've personally learned about leadership, and how has that shaped your approach to leading others?
Okay, great question again. Well, as a leader, you're not in a vacuum, and everybody who's ever run a team is painfully aware of that. Like goals don't just fall from the sky. Well, hopefully they don't, but they come mostly from somebody with a different function. And if all goes well, then you and the others, the team members, had a good deal of influence in the goal formation process. But in any event, you have to make sure that you have a really good grip on what is wanted, customer requirements in general. Really understand them, and where you're having a hard time, go clarify. And that's not easy. It's hard to feel dumb and have to ask again. And so there's a lot of humility that needs to be learned, and doesn't come natural to everybody. Certainly not to me. And of course, there's often room for interpretation, but make sure customer and you, if you have direct access to the customer, fantastic. If not, then maybe it's a superior. Have a good agreement of what is hard landscape, i.e., what the metrics and the features are that must be met, and what is the soft landscape, but perhaps what is uncharted territory. And that must be addressed ideally with the team, because it looks really dumb and you waste a lot of time if you don't, if the team asks, well, essentially, like in a nutshell, what are we supposed to do? And you don't have a clear answer. At least then you must say, well, we got this mandate and that much is clear, but to here, all that is unclear. That is a satisfactory answer, but don't hide the fact if you don't know anything. And to me, that is actually the beauty. That has been a valuable lesson to me, and one that I've needed to learn more than once. And when I thought I had understood what was wanted from the team, when I really hadn't. It's painful, especially when the team doesn't immediately call you out on it, and you and the team climb higher and higher, but you're up the wrong tree. So that is also why I love the agile approach, which of course there's a role for a leader, and there are several leaders, the product owner or however it's called, the role, and the scrum master and so on. But this early and frequent feedback from those who will later have to live with whatever your team builds, that is so important. And the agile framework at least recognizes that this four quadrant table of the known knowns, the unknown knowns, the known unknowns, and to quote a what was he, a minister of defense in the US, right? Donald Rumsfeld, the unknown unknowns, that they exist for you and the team and for the customer as well, and that it is everybody's job together to move as much as possible to the known quadrant. And how has this shaped my personal leadership approach? I repeat, humility. There are, I don't think so, there are no natural born leaders, and at least I've had to say goodbye to that beautiful self image. And it is all about authentic communication. The four quadrant thing that I just mentioned, it is also really useful in personal team psychology, and it's called the Johari square there. And only that the quadrant axes are the introspective and the external perspectives. That is, what is known to you but not to the others, and what is also about yourself, and what is visible to the others, but where you have a blind spot. And then, of course, the huge fields that really the iceberg itself of what you don't know about yourself and anybody else doesn't know either. And so
No
the
problem.
Johari square applies to really everybody. And it is really a marvel that the interpersonal communication and teamwork at all. So when you say something to the team, you know that they will not only hear the factual part of the message, like, and the appellative part, like the do this, do that, but it will change what they believe about you and what they believe that you believe about them. And of course, this happens in the mind of the leader too. So, and this is way too complex, and it happens way too fast to be applied cognitively to the interaction. You can know that, you can read this in a book, but how do you apply that? At least I haven't found really a good way to immediately apply. So whatever leadership style I apply, depending on situation of people, the one thing that I can do, be as authentic as I can. And it's probably a lifelong journey to make it a habit to check myself for clarity in communication and avoid or at least recognize the hidden messages that I sense, that I get, that I interpret, whether they're true or perceived, because that is really the core of what makes a great team. When you're then in the performing phase, you have a team where everybody knows as much as they can about everybody else and they start trusting each other. And then things will really move.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the best thing about that you've just said there is, the fact that if you are authentic and you are clear with your communication, I suppose it almost encourages people to sort of give that upstream feedback as well. If they maybe have a question or they maybe are unsure on something, the fact that you've been so clear and so transparent means that they're probably going to be the same. They're not going to hide things away from you. They're going to be, equally as open with their
Exactly.
communication
Yes.
too.
Haven't we all been in the situation where we have the feeling, man, I should have really understood that and I didn't. And now I'm too afraid to ask. So as much as that is possible, encourage by asking questions, expose yourselves like, I should know that, but I don't. So I'm asking these kinds of things.
Yeah.
That will go a long way.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. Well, thank you very much for that, Sven. That was fantastic. I really appreciate your insights there.
Excellent. Thanks for the opportunity.